When a system produces inequality for decades, we kind of start to assume that's just its natural state. But what if that system was actually designed to work that way from the very beginning? Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems that shape our world, starting with the very foundation of where we all live.
Okay, just for a second, picture your own town or city. You've probably noticed it, right? Neighborhoods are often divided along racial lines. It's a pattern so common we almost take it for granted, and it really begs a huge question. Why? Why are American cities so starkly segregated?
Well, the story we've usually been told is that it's just the way things shook out. This is the whole idea of de facto segregation. It suggests this reality is just the sum of millions of private decisions. People wanting to live near others like them, differences in income, or even private prejudice. It's a story that makes the whole thing seem almost accidental, a natural outcome.
But what if that entire story is wrong? What if the segregation we see all around us today wasn't an accident at all? What if it wasn't natural, but was actually built, piece by piece, by deliberate government policy?
So, to really get our heads around this, we need to unpack a really critical distinction. It's kind of like a tale of two different types of segregation, and believe me, the difference between them changes absolutely everything. On one side, you have de facto segregation. That just means in fact or in practice. This is that story we just talked about, private choices, social patterns. But on the other side, you have de jure segregation, which means by law. Now this suggests something much, much more intentional, that this wasn't just some social thing, it was the direct result of official, written-down government policy.
And that right there is the central argument of this incredible book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which is our guide for this whole explainer. Rothstein basically argues that we have a forgotten history in America, a history where the government itself was the main architect of segregation.
This quote really just gets to the heart of it. Rothstein is saying this wasn't some big secret, it was unhidden public policy. It was totally intentional. So if that's true, how in the world did they do it?
Well, it turns out there was a whole toolkit of government policies used to build this system, and they were working at the federal, state, and local levels, all at once. Let's take a look at three of the most powerful tools in that kit. First up, public housing. So during the New Deal, the government built all these housing projects across the country to help families out. But here's the twist. They used what was called a neighborhood composition rule. And what that meant was, even in neighborhoods that were already racially integrated, the government would literally come in and build a whites-only project over here and a blacks-only project over there, actively creating segregation where it didn't even exist before. The second tool was maybe even more powerful, federal mortgages. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, is the agency that helped create the 30-year mortgage, which opened up homeownership to millions of Americans. But there was a huge catch. For developers to get an FHA-backed loan that made all those new suburban homes affordable, they had to agree not to sell any of them to African Americans. The government literally made segregation a condition of getting the financing.
And this image right here just drives the point home. This wasn't some subtle, behind-the-scenes policy. This sign, from a development subsidized by the government's own Veterans Administration, is advertising itself as exclusive and restricted. These policies created a whole suburban landscape that was, by official government design, for white families only.
Okay, the third tool was local zoning. At first, some cities had laws that straight up barred black people from living on certain blocks. After the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, they found a clever workaround, economic zoning. By banning things like apartments or requiring huge, expensive lot sizes, communities could pretty effectively price out lower-income families, which, because of all the other discrimination, disproportionately meant black families.
So here's the most important point. These policies from way back when didn't just fade away, they kicked off a chain reaction of inequality. Because where you live determines so much more than just your address. It shapes your access to good schools, to jobs, to healthcare, and maybe most importantly, your ability to build wealth.
Let's make this super concrete. Picture this. In 1948, a white family could buy a brand new, government-subsidized home in a place like Levittown for about $8,000. A black family with the exact same income, maybe even the same military service record, was explicitly forbidden from buying there. Fast forward to today, that same modest house is now worth over $350,000. That is a massive amount of wealth that one family was allowed to build and pass down, and another family was denied, all because of a government rule.
And this quote just nails why that matters so much. See, a job gives you an income, but a home gives you wealth, and wealth is something you can pass on to your kids.
So by systematically blocking access to homeownership for one group while subsidizing it for another, these policies created a racial wealth gap that is incredibly sticky and really, really hard to close.
And this brings us right back to where we started, to this crisis in perception. The facts on the ground really challenge the story we've been telling ourselves about how our cities and towns got to be the way they are.
You see, as long as we believe that segregation just happened, that it was de facto or natural, we can't possibly see the system that was built to create it. The policies, the rules, the entire architecture, it all stays invisible. But once you understand that it was de jure, that it was designed, the whole picture just flips. You start to see the machinery behind the outcome. And once you see it, you just can't unsee it.
And that leaves us with a really profound final question. The Supreme Court has actually said that if segregation is the result of state action, if it's de jure, then there is a constitutional obligation to fix it. So, if we accept that our segregated landscape was created by law and by policy, what then is our obligation to undo it?
Here at Crisis in Perception, we try to understand how these systems shape what we believe and how having better tools helps us see things more clearly. This project is free and open to everyone. If you'd like to support the research that goes into this, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a much longer, audio-based analysis, check out the deep dive we've linked below. And of course, if you enjoy this kind of systems-level thinking, please like, subscribe, and let us know what we should explore next. Thanks so much for watching.